a brief word about myself. Um, as Debbie said, I'm a clergy person in the United Methodist Church denomination, serving here in the Chicago area. And I was given such great support of my bishop in 2011 to be able to move my congregational ministry appointment to the specialized ministry in mental health. And it's just very much a privilege for me to be working in this whole area. I myself, I live with bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed in 2006. And really, I'll share with you that as a clergy person, having identified, that calling in my life, of course, there are periods of doubt and renewed faith. But in the time of my diagnosis, I really had questions around, why has God abandoned me? Where are you, God? When I need you more, when I'm just lacking in what I can find, in myself. And then in my own journey, in the midst of putting my life back together, I began to experience again this reassurance and of being held up through the sources of the sacred that I draw on, which are various. So I began to speak out publicly in 2010 with in the ministry field and in the broadcast ministry area here in Chicago, in speaking in various venues. And as I would talk, I would have always a clergy person come up and talk with me quietly about themselves or a family member, and strangers and friends would also come up to me and talk especially about their own spiritual struggles and their spiritual strengths and the way that they draw on that for such successful living. So I wanted to share these stories to really bring them to light, because sometimes we're just so hesitant to talk about this very deep and personal parts of our life. It's a very vulnerable part of our lives to share. So in that vein, I do want to say a thank you to the 28 people who spoke with me from the course of 2012 to this January 2014 in their bravery, their courage, and really their just pure joy in being able to have an opportunity to share about their spirituality and what that has meant to them throughout their journey with bipolar disorder. So let me move to the next slide about, why talk about this. We have in our checklist, so to speak, of wellness toolbox of coping skills and strategies, meditation and mindfulness, and these certainly contribute to the awareness of our symptoms and have physical benefits and give a sense of well-being. What I'm hoping to achieve in some fashion as I talk about this more, and I hope everyone on this attending today will go from here and bring this conversation into your people where you are, to bring spirituality really into this checklist. However, it's not something to say that it's let's say a practice like meditation or mindfulness. The spirituality really is the core of a person's self-identity, and then the way this expressed, of course, can be through meditation and mindfulness and in so many other ways that you'll hear about today. So those are the first one, really. And then the next one is that all of this wellness and spirituality, we know, it draws, is centered within the context of a person's story, so that there's not just a separate placeholder for that in what it means to live with bipolar disorder, but that it's really the core and center of a person's life. And then to honor a person's individuality, because you'll hear there's a wide, beautiful way that persons experience and understand themselves. So let me move on here. Here you have from Kenneth Pargament, who's really been instrumental in strongly supporting clinicians to bring spirituality into therapy. And his last sentence, there is just so absolutely true. Any psychology that overlooks these parts of life remains incomplete. And the question is, why would a clinician be hesitant to talk about religion or spirituality anyway? This might be, to respect, the clinician's own life experience. That might be a part of their own life that they feel uncomfortable with, or even have a firm grounding of what this is in their life, and really, wants to, as any therapist, in a conversation, not to project that, into the conversation. So also another way that a person can be in a therapy where this really is at the center of the conversation in an open way is through the licensed clinical pastoral counselors. And some are, very open to a wide understanding of what spirituality is. And so that's just another option that is there for people to explore. In talking with these 28 persons from around the United States, I had two questions here. The bracketed one was another way of reframing the first question: what does spirituality mean to you? And then in what ways do you put spirituality into practice for a wellness lifestyle? And I didn't put a definition of spirituality here because that is what I'm hoping to bring to light, the broad experiences, so that we can move forward and take down some barriers of judgment and actually fear of talking about one's spiritual life, with peers even, as this is just a very precious and maybe tender part of a person's life. And then in the second question, some responses were journaling, meditating, walking, healthy eating, and a realm of other ways. And those are items that we have kind of, as I mentioned, in our toolbox for healthy living. The way these were approached came out of the expression of a person's spirituality in these practices. So here's just a brief, my data screen. 28 persons interviewed, 43 as the mean age there. You can see there are some imbalances here, so you can see here more females and also more bipolar 1. And the invitation to participate in the study just asked for a person with a bipolar diagnosis, age 18 and over. So you can see where the balance came out, and there's certainly room for moving forward and adding more diversity in these areas. Especially it's interesting under spiritual source. I did not ask someone, do they have a particular religion? What is it? But I looked at what a person named. And you can see, by far God, but it was interesting, of course, in having this broad conversation that really what we would think of as a spiritual source, 5 people, did not name that. And so I think those are parts of people's experience we want to also bring to the front and center of our conversations. So here is the screen of the insights that I drew together from talking with these persons. And they came from the commonality of their experiences. And while I list 6 separate insights, there's complexity and overlap in all of these, just as the way that life cannot be put into boxes. I'm going to talk about each insight, and I have 1 or 2 quotes from the interviews that I will talk about and have on the screen for you. And I want to have these quotes in front of us because their voice and the experiences of the persons expressed in their voice, I think is much more important than mine, and really puts a face and a life into this whole area. So you will see as I go through the screens that there is at the top, you will see the number 1 insight, for instance, and then quotes. And you'll see when I get to this, at the bottom right hand of your screen, you will see the number of the insights, so you just don't lose track of where we are at. So the overall arching area here is connection. We all have the innate desire for connection as a human being. And so this connecting was the centerpiece of each of the conversations. And this includes ways of being connected to oneself or not being, that supports wellness, and also connection of well-being of one another. And the one another was intentional in that instead of the other, one another includes the person in that circle of connecting. And so the heart of wellness really is taking care of oneself to be the most strong, triumphant, successful person that a person can be. And out of that, springing just out of that comes the desire to be in partnership, to contribute, to help, to be part of the lives of others for the best possible lives that they can live, and to support each other. What I'm going to do is, you will see here that I'm going to break down each of these circles. So the well-being of oneself part of the presentation is in red, and the of one another is in blue. So you'll see that here. So the well-being of oneself really came down into then 2 sub-areas. The connection for the well-being of oneself was expressed in the language of personal spirituality, and then in describing the nature of spiritual experiences. When I finish this section here, I'll stop and we can have questions before I get to the section on well-being of one another. So the first insight, spirituality is deeply personal, profound, transforming, and life-sustaining. This is from a person who is really talking about a relationship with God, with the higher power, an entity, the universe, inner strength, other people, all of that was part of the conversation. And in the conversations with persons expressing personal spirituality, all of that realm was expressed throughout the whole varied conversations. And the theme that was brought out is the relationship is one-to-one as a source of strength that guides, creates, brings hope, takes care of the person, rescues, and brings peace. And so Suzanne's quote really brings many of these components together. And she really draws on this at her deepest need when she's, when I'm feeling very depressed, I keep a lot of it in. So she is really talking in this about her ultimate connectedness with the universe. And in the conversation, she shares about the close supportive relationships with her uncle, who's a Baptist minister, and two of her friends also who live with the mood disorder. She comes from a family with a cousin who is Muslim, a grandmother who is a Roman Catholic, and then, of course, the uncle who is a Baptist minister. And you can see how there is not always a single strength, spiritual strength that a person would draw on it. This shows, I think, the very complexity of what we're talking about. And here, excuse me, one moment here. Okay. That gave you a chance to read the screen. This is really from a person who had given a lot of thought before the conversation around her purpose and really the how she draws on what she draws on to live out really her destiny and what she sees that she is here for in her life. And she talks about her inner drive is to develop love and compassion to the highest level. So this really is not only a goal, but it really comes from the inner drive, the very center of this this person's being. And the second quote from her really shares how, you know, all of this just doesn't get wrapped up very neatly, you know, into a bundle. So, you know, part of the journey of living with bipolar disorder is allowing oneself and embracing the questioning that everything doesn't have to be wrapped up neatly. The second insight, still related to personal spirituality: gratitude, love, awe, compassion, and mystery, as well as anger, grief, loss, and abandonment, all have a place within spirituality. This person was talking about some very crisis times in her life. Anger when she was first diagnosed, and then that anger really turned to knowing herself to be intimately connected with God. And you can see here, as I was talking about this insight number 2, here is, all of number two's insight just being expressed in this person's, experience of having the gratitude here in how her life was moved from thoughts of not living to living, and also acknowledging anger. This person expressed the really the mystery that is part of a person's spirituality. Her connection here, the sense of connection, is that I am known, and that knowing is not something particularly that she puts a box or a name, a direct name or label on, but is living into the mystery of this and how this being known is part of the strength that she draws on. Insight number 3. Now this moves us into spiritual experiences, which, this is an area where persons with bipolar disorder might be hesitant to talk to even another person, or in particular a therapist, for being seen as, oh, this experience is a symptom of hypomania or mania, that it's not real, that this should be chalked up as a heightened symptom, or set aside as this doesn't have any meaning or relevance to a person's life. And here in the conversations, religious experiences, from being very heightened experiences to being very subtle, were shared, and that these experiences really contribute to wellness and sustaining wellness, and just being forming and affirming who a person is. And speaking, to this, Rabbi Heschel and William James, both of these persons, significant voices in their own areas, that looking at really validating that a spiritual experience or a religious experience has meaning and is true and a real part of a person's experience. And if you haven't delved into William James's writing, I highly recommend it. However, you want to be ready to have your mind challenged, because it's quite some of it's quite esoteric reading, but really was transformative in just utterly transformative in the area of American psychology and in understanding mystical experiences as well. Many, many thanks here to Lucinda Jewell, who contributed this statement on her spiritual experience. And I'm going to read this to you because I'd like you to get the sense of the wholeness in her life that she places this significant experience. As chair of DBSA, I support the vision of wellness for people living with what we label as depression and mania, and personally, all people who live with the symptoms of a mental health condition. Certainly, my own wellness would not be possible without the visionary aspect of mania, one that allowed me to experience satori, or cosmic consciousness, and is one I will never forget. These revelations have guided my wellness program, which has included medicine, therapy and drugs, nutrition, exercise, and most importantly, spiritual practice, which in my case is daily meditation. And you can see here how she has a very holistic, well thought out whole way of living for her own, living in strength and triumph and utter success and beauty in her life. I was asked one time, well, how do I know what's going on? How do I know? And my response was to find another person who you trust to talk about it with, sitting with an experience and resonating in it and cherishing it, really is a first step. And maybe the experience you go, well, I don't know what that was all about. And to find someone really to talk about that with, and that just can help in helping that unfold and finding meaning in a person's life. Well, I'm going to pause here and see what questions you have. We're at the end of the first connection section. So Debbie, I think you're going to take the questions as they come up.
Yes, I will, Cheryl. Thank you for this. The first question, although I was raised in a Christian family, I have no religious beliefs at all. Does that mean I cannot experience spirituality?
Oh, not at all. There are so many parts of a person's inner being, and that the person draws on. And I think, um, using an organized religion not using, that's not a very good word, but claiming an organized religion can be a very strong source with the belief system and the community and the rituals for a person's spirituality. But that's not the only way. And in many of the conversations, the connection was with nature, with organic foods, organic ways of living, and that was the connection. That was the person's spirituality.
Great, thank you. The next question. My son has bipolar disorder and is currently attending college pursuing a degree in psychology. What amazes me is his ability to be so concerned for others. He volunteers in the adult mental wellness at a hospital, as well as his enormous empathy for others. Why does he not care about his own well-being as much as he does for others? Also, how does one with bipolar disorder try meditation when thoughts are racing through your mind?
Oh my gosh, that's a lot to answer quickly here, but really both very very important areas, to think about. And I don't know if I really have the why as to your son having empathy for others, but not himself. I think, that's really a way of expressing, one's own way of being in the world. And, perhaps that will come around, excuse me, that will come around as him really finding himself as a person who is one who deserves self-kindness and self compassion. And then the second question, can you repeat that, Debbie?
Sure, I can.
Okay.
She asked about meditating when your mind is swirling. How do you stop that?
Well, I don't know if you, I don't think you can. I think it's, it takes um, just some time to let those thoughts kind of come up and let them go and let them escape and just sit with those and not make a judgment that um, the person is not doing things the right way. I think one of um, the challenges with meditation is to think that there is one right way or there is a wrong way. Um, just the desire to sit with oneself, with one's own sense of being where they are in that moment is just a very, very start. And wherever we are at in our day, that will just bubble up. And it might be that 1 or 2 minutes is just the amount of time that a person would want to sit and be still. And maybe later in the day, try another, 1 or 2 moments. And, sometimes it's not just the right time. Any other questions there?
Yes, thank you. During my first manic episode, I had a very negative experience with spirituality. I had spiritual hallucinations. How do you recover from negative manic experiences with spirituality?
Hmm. I think, that is just a whole journey. And in that, um, in that journey, if there is a person who has kind of worked their way through that to talk with, I think this is an area where just another um, mentor, spiritual mentor, um, would be a person to guide one through those. Um, there's not an easy way through that, and certainly it's not a straight line. I think that's a circling through and working through um, those kinds of experiences that are not helpful or positive in a life.
Great, thank you. Another question. How do I know that my spiritual experience is not indeed a symptom of mania or hypomania?
Right. This is, where a person can, um, I think if a person can write about the experience, journal about it, draw, put it into art, clay, or find some way to express what that experience was like rather than what it is or was, but to bring that to expression and kind of wrestle with that. And, there are times when we do, and I say we as a person who lives with bipolar disorder, when there are times of mania when, there are, delusions of grandeur that indeed are from, manic episodes. And having some awareness, perhaps afterwards, I think certainly in the intensity of an experience such that, like that, it's hard to have the reflective awareness, but to kind of process that through reflection and awareness, um, and just to work through that in a slow process and not rush in that way.
One more question. Is there a possibility that a mood disorder triggers a part of the brain that is tuned in to spirituality?
Hmm. I will have to say I'm not versed in the brain on this area, so I will defer answering that because I don't want to give wrong, incorrect direction on that. Um, there are some resources that you might uh, look at. Um, David Miklowitz with the Bipolar Disorder Survival Guide is looks at the brain in his work, as well as the book New Hope. And I'm sorry, I can't recall the author on that. So those would be two sources to start with.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl.
Should I move?
Yes, go
All
ahead.
right, I'll move on. Okay. So we're looking at the well-being of one another, which was came out in two areas. In really as in looking for looking at one another, what does that mean for how a person lives out their life with a purpose? And in care and compassion, being caring and compassionate for one another. Insight number 4, a spiritual life can be as simple and yet as profound as helping someone else not feel alone. And I bring this up in this insight because sometimes we think our meaning and purpose has to be um, large and grandeur and very prophetic, and we can embrace what meaning and a purpose in life is for us in just a very day-to-day way. The first quote is from a person whose creativity is expressed in film. And when this person sat down for the conversation with me, the first thing that was said was, I have to tell you I'm not that I am an atheist. And I said to myself, this is going to be one of the best conversations of all of this. And he was just so enlightening and sharing of his own special way of relating to people. And that is what gives him his purpose there. And then the second one, um, in this conversation, really tapped into the illness and saying, you know, really, I'm not glad that I have this illness, but because I do have this, I do have empathy, I feel connected, and I really want to educate other people who don't understand, and that gives her life a direction. Looking at care and compassion, insight 5, caring about another person and acting with compassion reflect self-care and self-compassion for one's own wellness. I think that's I think maybe a different way of saying what, um, we talk about when a person does volunteering or something in that vein, that when a person um, is wanting to give and to help someone else, um, that the person who's doing the giving, the volunteering, really feels blessed in ways that were not anticipated. This conversation is one that just really sums up this whole way of being in the world with a person with depression, and finding a way to move out of this that is a way to be present and be there for other people. And this is a woman who works on the corner of this intersection in a very busy part of downtown Chicago. And the organization that she works with is one that many persons without homes or who are in transitional living in particular work with this organization to sell newspapers. And she is there, representing the organization and just like many other persons there. But she really sees what she's doing there is not just to sell papers, but to be there to listen to other people. And that is what she feels like her purpose is. And the last sentence, when I'm not there, I wonder who will listen, is really not even so much empathetic, but is in understanding the human connection that we all need someone to listen and to have that human connection. The last insight, and this is under care and compassion, number 6, having 5 insights would be nice and neat and tidy, but the conversations out of them emerged what needed to be a 6th insight. Accepting support from a community is life-sustaining. This is a woman with who claims the Christian faith and has been involved in churches for just about all of her life. And about midlife, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And her support system is beyond what she would be doing for herself, such as healthy eating, exercising. She has that in her life. That's her survival package. But when she's not able to do that for herself, she has this knowing, this relationship with the faith community that is there for her. And she talked about how when she was not going out and not eating, that persons who she did not even know from her faith community would come over and bring her food or call her or send her cards. And even when she didn't feel like responding, she knew that there were people who cared about her. And the word web just so very much describes a whole support system for persons who live with bipolar disorder, this web of a community that sustains and carries us. I have not yet talked about a support group as a strength of a person's inner life and outer life, and I save that actually for this last, second to last quote, because it shows so powerfully how the support group community is just so profoundly important, and the people being present there can make such an impact unknowingly many times. And often a support group is with people that you don't know. There may be regulars there, but you just don't know in some of the support groups who's going to be there. So he shared about when he was in one of his worst depressions, about really complete anger and utter resentment. And it just took him a lot to get himself to go to a support group, and really had so many barriers up um, with others, in the group. And then when he just felt like um, he couldn't go there to find some meaning, he stepped back because of his own need, which I think is important in a support group, to know when a person's just not ready to be there. But sometimes also, on the other hand, when a person doesn't feel ready to be there, that's just the time when a person needs to be there. So he finally went back, and he felt a greater connection at this point. And he felt encouraged as he heard people who were putting their lives back together. And he said, if they can do it, I can do it. And that was such, and he calls it a turning point. And that's just exactly what this was for him, just a turning point. And to make that conscious decision, accepting and then saying, I'm going to do this. And really feeling a lifting up of this burden that was just weighing him down. And he talked about hope, and this sentence, hope sprung up in my heart. And that, I think, is really at one of the centers of spirituality and wellness, is the knowing there is hope and living in the hope and living into one's hope for wellness and just for a beautiful, triumphant life. To wrap up here, at the end of each conversation, I said, well, what was it like for you to talk about this? What did you get out of this conversation? And I also said, asked, have you talked about spirituality with your therapist? And I would say out of the 28, there were 4 who said yes. And it wasn't always people weren't talking about it because the therapist didn't want to bring it up, but because the purpose of the therapy was very specific for that treatment at that time, or the person just did not feel comfortable bringing that up. So a whole range of areas there. So this person just really surprised me at the depth of what the interview experience was like, that she really hadn't spoken her thoughts out loud, and this person had thought very extensively about her spirituality and what that means in her life. And then to speak it out loud, I listened through the whole conversation. It was a long conversation. And for her to speak it out loud was really powerful for her. And it didn't sum up everything. And that she was going to continue thinking about this and continue reflecting about that. And that really is my hope in all of this work, is that this opens up the conversation and opens the door just to continue being thoughtful and honoring and respecting each other's vulnerability and each other's experience that is different from one's own. What I'll do is, I have the screen here that's the summary of the insights that I had at the beginning of the presentation. And with any study, limitations and recommendations, as I said at the beginning, definitely need ethnic and diversity. I have in here greater number of respondents with 28 personal interviews. That's a substantial number of respondents for a study like this, but to broaden the number of respondents will help broaden ethnicity, age range, and also to balance out male, female, and bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Also recommendations, 7 of the interviews were in person, one by FaceTime and the others over the phone. In-person interviews allow for body language, more conversation. However, that would limit the geography at this point in the study where I'm at. In the conversations, I have your next steps to address resilience, which I did not raise it as an insight at this point. In many conversations, experiences that showed just tremendous overcoming and throughout one's journey was shared. And looking at spirituality and resilience is what I have been looking at in my own personal life and my own reflections in living with bipolar disorder, and would like to expand the conversations here into this area. Here are the references from the quotes and my disclosures, as needed. And Debbie read some of these at the beginning. I also have my professional memberships there. Here's my contact information, and what I hope to do in the next step, as I said, is to look at resilience. I invite all of the persons attending here and others who you might talk to as well to contact me in some way. Here, my email's preferred, to let me know that you would like to talk with me more about spirituality and resilience. I hope to continue having more interviews and conversations. So Debbie, are there more questions, or do we have time?
Yes, we do have time, and there are a few additional questions. First question, what are at least the 3 main things a faith community needs to do in order to have a strong mental health ministry where persons who have a mental illness and their families are included in the life and leadership of the congregation?
Well, I don't know if I can narrow it down to 3. Let's see if I can come up with probably 3, at least the 3 top ones I would say. The first would be to educate the congregation, and there are numerous educational materials available. DBSA has a wealth of brochures that are can be downloaded as PDFs from the dbsalliance.org website. There are other brochures that are free, that are excellent as well, from the National Institute of Mental Health. And the second week in October is Mental Health Awareness Month, and that is a time when there is a great opportunity there to connect with community service providers, with the high schools, with the grade schools, with parent organizations, to partner and have educational programs, and not just educational programs, but to have persons who are willing and able to express their own journey with bipolar disorder, to be the person who is there to share and to express what how a person has worked through their experience through spirituality, and just to be there as a peer voice. So I think also May is the National Mental Health Awareness Month, so there are great opportunities in May as well. There are another place where resources for faith communities, and actually for anyone, is from mentalhealthministries.org. And this is from Reverend Susan Gregg Schroeder, has excellent resource and study guides and informational DVDs for faith communities there. So the education and having a person who lives with bipolar disorder to speak, and as well to ask a family member to share and to talk, because the family member is experiencing this whole journey, along with their loved one, and may have their own struggles as well, and their own ways of sharing, ways that their loved one and that person have been so deeply connected. So getting the family voice into the conversation is important as well. And partnering with the community leaders is another important way to reach out, and the community leaders can be a way to tell the persons they work with, this faith community is really welcoming and inviting, and you might want to go to church there. The next thing, around support groups, is most of the support groups are hosted by a faith community, a hospital, or a library. And for a faith community to start a support group, to open up their doors to a group that's looking for a place, and we need more faith-based support groups where a person can openly talk about their spirituality in that context. So I hope that gives some ideas. I also have done work with the mental health initiative that I developed in 2012, 2013, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about that, what that's about, and that really focuses on training faith community leaders in developing their own mental health ministry.
Great.
That was a long answer.
Next question. What advice would you give someone who is hesitant to take medicine, believing that they can do all things through Christ?
Well, I'll tell you and don't take this please as a therapeutic advice or doctor's advice. This is, from my own personal experience, is that without medication, I would not be as well and successful in my own way that I'm in my relationships, in what I'm doing in my work. Medication just really is essential for me, and as a person of faith, I know that science has made tremendous strides, and scientists, in fact, some are the most spiritual people I know, who see the beauty and the complexity of the world we live in. So it's a very personal thing, but I do say strongly I believe in medication as what's essential for a person's wellness.
Great, thank you. What tools would you suggest in working with jail population? How do we educate them about spirituality, especially when they're in denial that he or she has bipolar? Many inmates have fear of expressing misdiagnosis due to judgments.
Our brothers and sisters who are in jails and prisons need to have that trusted person, that they can indeed, talk with. This is, again, this is just not an easy answer. I think that if there can be a support group that is very open, where a person doesn't have to say, gosh, I've got depression or bipolar disorder, I need to go to this support group. But it's a place where people can come together and talk. And, I go back and forth as to whether an educator, facilitator, someone who might bring this group together would be from within their own community, or someone from outside the community, who has been trained and has skills and would come in. I can't give an answer to that. I think it depends on the personnel and the environment. But education and providing just a safe place, and there's just not an easy answer to that. I think it's just a very small step-by-step process, very loving and without judgment, as because there's so much that is already there.
Thank you. One last question. What effect does regular worship have on the cycling of the bipolar afflicted?
On what was the last part of it? The cycling?
Yes.
Okay, I wonder if that means with the person is asking about the moving from the different symptoms from.
I would say.
Personally, I think so. I think that's what it is. Okay. Well, one part of it is there's a place then, an opportunity to develop a support system, of, of a faith community, in being, in a faith community, regularly, on that, in that way. And I will say that I'm a person who really finds the ritual of worship to be where I can even find my comfort level, my solace, my way that I can express who I am and my connection with God. And we go through times of normal times of sadness and joy, as we're in worship. I think the expression of the the different seasons of worship, the different liturgical seasons go from, Lent, which is very introspective, to Advent, which is much more outward focused. And I think the whole rhythm of the liturgical season, I'm talking from my Christian community, can really help with finding a way to express what a person's experiencing. And I will tell you, when I'm in church, from between one hymn to hearing the choir sing to all the different parts, I can be smiling and I bring my Kleenex because then I'm crying. So I think it just helps in expression of what a person is feeling.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. I will just add a few comments, which are many thanks, new perspectives, and wonderful presentation. So I want to thank you for sharing your research and knowledge with us, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Debbie. My pleasure.